All right. Hello. Hey, everyone. So it has been a while since we've been doing these. And I've actually been thinking about maybe actually switching it up a bit, kind of cycling like through like people that join and so forth, because everyone's schedules have been quite intense recently. And we'll see how it goes. But it might become the new normal where it's maybe just two of us or three of us. But yeah, especially I've gotten a lot of complaints about people complaining that people are talking over one another and it's hard to hear. So I guess that's going to solve that problem at the very least. You can have less opinions. Um, all right, but you are going to hear Zandor's mechanical keyboard slamming
Oh,
away.
am I not on uh,
The
eh,
anti-keyboard,
the anti-keyboard one?
yeah, the
I am
keyboard
now. You shouldn't
cleanser.
hear it anymore.
All right. So we have a couple of things worth talking about that happened this month or a couple of months before. I can't even remember when was the last time we did one of these. Some of these I know a bit about. Some of these Andor knows a bit about. Some of these we don't actually know that much about, and I think we can just together try and make sense of it. But so basically, just in summary, so I think what's really cool that we want to chat about is the new release for TypeScript. It's release candidate, right? It's
Mm-hmm.
not in beta anymore.
No,
Okay,
it's
cool.
release candidate.
I think like it got into beta like since between the last time we had one of these and now, like it got into beta and into release candidate. Then Material UI 6 is out. I think we want to chat about that a bit. Then this is from 5 months ago, so it might be a bit oldish, but I think it's really like topical and really cool. Is the Atlassian team has released something called Pragmatic Drag and Drop, which is a bit lower level than. So if you've used kind of the beautiful React D&D, it's more flexible. It's a bit lower level. It's what the React D&D is built on top of, and it's also framework agnostic, and it allows you to do a lot of cool things. And I think so. I think it's useful spending some time on that as well. Um, then my Angular journey is coming to an end. So I think it'd be cool to chat about that and chat about kind of what my experience has been in the last 6 months doing like full-time Angular work. So now I'm back to React and Next.js and so forth. Um, and then yeah, we can also chat about the TypeScript, experimental TypeScript support in Node. Then there's this really cool talk by Minka from. He's obviously the guy behind Angular and also behind the new Quick framework, and where he kind of this came out in July. So it's also a bit old, but I think it's also worth talking about. Where he talks about kind of the frameworks currently converging. And then lastly, there's this kind of thing that Jake Archibald posted recently where he noticed that JavaScript garbage collection doesn't really work in the way it does, or you would expect it to do. And I think it might be worth just chatting about that and actually explaining what is happening there, just for interest. This is obviously not going to like if you're doing this type of level of things, you probably already understand what's going on here. Um, and this is like a bit of a micro optimization, but I think it's still cool just talking about it theoretically what's happening. All right, so I think let's get into the TypeScript. And uh, Xandor, I'm curious whether there's anything here that you're kind of excited about or that you feel is really prominent in the new release.
So iterator helper methods are cool,
Mm,
right? So this is something where iterators, like an array is an iterator, and an array has map, and an array has reduce, and an
yes.
array has filter. But
Yes.
iterators are really kind of like a protocol that's
Yeah.
specified in the language, and under the
Mm,
hood, it means that um, whenever you call an iterator, which is kind of like an object, it's got a next
mm,
function, you get back like a what's it? Is it a value? And whether
mm,
it's done or not.
Yeah,
And
that's similar to how generators also work.
well, generators give that same thing back, and it's
Yes.
so these iterative methods also work with generators, and
Mm.
some things can be iterators and iterables at the same time. It's really, really cool.
Mm.
And these helper methods now mean that on the prototype of this, which is hard to get a hold of, you'd have to like instantiate
Mm.
one and then go get prototype off. You now
Mm.
have map, filter, and a few other helpers. So you no longer need to go like something that's iterable and then like array from or
Mm.
keys or values or however you want to get the thing out, and
Mm.
then do the map, which
Mm.
you can just use it. You can just go dot map, right? So
Mm.
imagine like the headers object, like
Yes.
the headers class. You just go dot map, and
Yeah.
it'll give you like key value pairs that you can
Yeah.
map over.
Yeah. Or if
So
you, go ahead. Yeah.
so this is really cool, and especially because I have a habit sometimes of when I'm working with like really old APIs that suck.
Mm.
That are very
Yeah.
cumbersome. I don't know if you've ever used like the DOMs pre-walker or like node walker or like node
Mm.
iterator API. It's like super
Mm.
imperative. So what I end
Mm.
up doing is I end up wrapping that with the generator function, which
Yeah.
is that makes it super convenient to work with and makes it even more convenient if I can just go dot map on stuff like that.
Yeah. Yeah.
I
Yeah. You
think
can even like, you can attach an iterator to any object.
yeah,
I'm
there's a
curious whether
symbol, a
can
well-known
you
symbol for that.
override? I guess you can
Yeah,
prototypically override the iterator on an array.
you could.
It's
I
a
don't know if
really
that's a
bad
great
idea,
idea.
I'd probably hate you for it, but you can.
So I would subclass array and do it there. And then my
So
special arrays iterate differently, but not all
yeah,
arrays, right? Like,
yeah. So this is really cool, and I think this is really helpful for people that have libraries and stuff.
mhm.
I actually I like iterators and I like the concept of it, but honestly I actually try and avoid them, because I more often than not find that I think it's just the way I mentally reason about my code, but I generally prefer having some helper function that I just apply to the thing. So
Mhm.
instead of putting a prototypical thing on the object itself, I have like do whatever or get key value pairs or whatever. That's a helper function that I just apply on the object and it gives it
So,
back to me.
so yeah, I would
Yeah.
typically do that as well. I'm
Mm.
not a fan of actually myself mutating the prototypes.
Yes.
It would be okay if you had a polyfill for the
Mm.
iterators proposal, for example. There's also another proposal that was like separated out from that called the async
Mm.
iterators helpers proposal.
Mm.
So if you had a polyfill for that, that would be fine.
Mm.
Even if it's like before it's like properly landed in browsers, I feel like that's okay.
Mm.
But
Mm. Yeah.
but beyond that, like I would have a helper function. The nice thing is sharing these kinds of common APIs means if you had a helper function that just calls map on a thing,
Yes.
right? Then
Mm.
now you can also do that on iterator. And that's
Yeah.
really cool, right?
Yeah.
Of course,
Yeah.
in functional programming, we've been doing this for ages.
Yeah.
And so if like there's libraries that respect the Fantasyland spec, which they have like
Yeah.
they kind of like they don't really mutate the prototypes of well-known things. Like they have special cases for the well-known things, but like now they can immediately handle iterators as well, like map function.
Mm. Mm.
Really nice.
Yeah. And I guess like this would be helpful. Like the one place where I do find iterators useful is with asynchronous behavior. The fact that you can for loop over like an async iterator.
Mhm.
That's useful. I guess there it would probably be more helpful. I find that more expressive than a helper function or something. Cool.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I mean, so it also becomes easier now. You can just like, dot map and then
Mm.
await all of that.
Mm.
You'll
Mm.
still have to wrap it in a promise.all with this, but
Mm.
I wonder if with the async iterators, if I haven't dug too deeply into that particular proposal, but I wonder if you like dot map on an set of async iterators, if like
Mm.
if you await that, whether it waits for all of them like promise.all does. That would be interesting.
Mm.
I don't know.
So let's quickly scan the other things. So disallowed nullish and truthy checks.
Yeah, so this is similar to the ESLint rule where you have like
Oh, okay, I see.
specific checks. Like there's a lot of overlap there, but they're not
Yes.
exactly the same.
So you need to strictly return a true or a false.
Well, no, it's just that like
Okay.
if you have like a constant condition,
Mm.
right? Where
Oh, I
like
see. Okay,
instead
so it's just
of like
it's better inference.
yeah, so
Okay,
it's
I
similar
see.
to the ESLint thing, but not necessarily true. Like not necessarily
Yes.
100% the same, but it's in the same spirit.
Yes.
And it's fine to
But
have
I
these kinds of things in
yeah, but I
TypeScript as
also
well.
guess like the benefit that it has is that it can access the TypeScript AST. So
Yeah.
it can probably infer a bit better than ESLint, whereas I think ESLint just looks at the actual code at face
So
value.
the kind of built-in ESLint rules only look at the JavaScript ESD basically, right? So if you get
Mm,
a different parser because you're working with TypeScript, still
mm,
so the TypeScript ESLint parser kind of just in the AST has extra nodes on it
mm,
that are about the type information, but
mm,
other than that, kind of match the ESP kind of like
mm,
AST format. So it's compatible with all the other rules that don't necessarily know about TypeScript. But of course, TypeScript ESLint
mm,
does have a set of type-aware linting rules. So that's really cool. Like you can, for example, it'll know whether a certain value might be able to be a promise. And
mm,
then you can have rules about, hey, you're not allowed to have like floating promises, right? Because a floating promise basically means that
mm.
it's a promise that has possibly like not handled its rejections,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
But it'll also know if you're passing that value to something that accepts a promise, and the assumption is that that thing will do it, right? So
Mm,
it's really nice to be able to like not have to worry about all of that
mm.
uh,
Yeah.
wandering.
So just to kind of quickly illustrate the benefit of TypeScript now actually doing this is, so what we're talking about is, let's say you have a get value, and for whatever reason, um, get value, you do a math.random, and you just check, is it bigger than, so it's going to randomly return true or false. So if you then do get value like this, it's obviously going to give an error, because it's going to say, why are you doing a conditional check? This is always going to be true, and it's going to be true because you don't call it, you pass the function. So it's truthy. So in this case, if you forgot to, so the assumption would be, you're always evaluating things that you don't know the value of up front.
Mhm.
If the value is always going to be the same, like it's like, like, so for example, if true, like there's no point in doing this. So it's going to give you warnings like that. So what I'm actually curious about now is if we, for example, do this, whether it's smart enough to know.
Get
Um,
if you call get value, I don't know.
yeah, and this is might be, so. I think the ESLint isn't able to do this because the ESLint, once again, like it doesn't go this deep. But
Yeah.
I'd be curious. I don't see why it wouldn't. Interestingly enough, one thing I like about Rescript, if you've ever used Rescript actually in its transpilation resolves a lot of this stuff for you. So it doesn't give you a
Mhm.
warning, but it would just be like, okay, cool. Basically, it's not even gonna add this stuff. It's just gonna run, like, just have the thing in there.
Okay, so it's
So
just going to
yeah,
take out the conditional clause.
yeah. Like, so conditions that are always true or false. It's just gonna get rid of
Assuming there's
all
like
the.
no issues with collisions or variable name shadowing inside that block.
Yeah, I don't know the specifics of it. I just know that's something that's neat that Rescript actually does. But also keep in mind, Rescript is a functional. It's like Elm,
Mhm.
so immutability does go a long way in terms of that. Um,
Mhm.
all right. So, is there anything else that is support for arbitrary module definitions? I
So
Why would you do this? I'm curious.
just so that it's like you don't have to special case it when the standard comes up with new stuff,
Okay.
or if
Okay.
like a bundler has a annotation, or
Oh,
you
I
know
see.
like if
I
they
see.
start like opting into that, so you just make a general case for it.
Yes.
Um,
Yes.
then the like unchecked side effects, no check is kind of interesting, right? So you can have TypeScript build stuff without doing a type check, right? Like let's say, I don't know,
Mm,
there's some part of your CI where you know it's already passed by the time it gets there, so don't bother type checking. So that's a little bit
mm,
faster. then build with intermediate errors. If you're using project references, which I'm just now starting to try and use that feature because I've got a big project that's getting real slow. And I've already gone through all the other optimization stuff I can do, like explicit return types because it caches those and all of that jazz. And incremental checking and like it's still just really slow. So now I'm gonna try this out. But imagine you're working on a monorepo where different parts of the project are owned by different teams, and now one of them has an error as there's like a TypeScript upgrade or something. You used to have to, like, you used to not be able to kind of complete the build. This now allows it.
Okay, interesting. Okay.
Also, they've kind of done something in editors. They now check the bit of the file that you're busy with first, if possible. They'll like prioritize checking that versus something else that you're not quite looking at. Obviously, editors are going to have to add support for this. I imagine VS Code will have it already or very soon. But other editors will have to add support for this.
They've definitely done a lot of improvements in terms of in that regard. Because TypeScript's definitely faster now when it comes to type checking and like static type checking as you're coding now than it was like 2 years ago. And I think one thing I do often see nowadays is that if a file doesn't exist when you write the import, it obviously gives you an error. But then if you add the file like again, then it doesn't pick up that the file is now there. So you need to like do the from thing again. You need to I usually just backspace and type it again to tell it like, okay, check now again.
Interestingly, what I've found is that, and this might be specific to my editor, I'm not sure, but I use like the TypeScript language server npm thing that's a wrapper around the actual TS server, so that it exposes it according to the LSP API, because apparently they just don't support that. It keeps getting kicked down the road because they're like, but this thing exists. We don't need to build one.
Interesting.
And what I've noticed is that if I reset my file, so that's basically like reopen it, right? My editor ends up kind of like running the LSP on that again. And like sometimes if there's like little errors that are effectively no longer actually an error, but like the LSP client is giving me a cached kind of like problem, that ends up working quite well without necessarily having to like restart the whole LSP server. Sometimes.
I see another thing here as well is I didn't actually even know about this. This might be old news, but that you actually have MTS and CTS.
Yeah. And when those are transpiled, it becomes like d.mts. If you're omitting declarations.
Yeah. So basically, what this is like this would be the common JS and the ES module. Like you have, like in the same way you would have MJS and CJS. You need to say up front. This is, I think, and this was one of the big challenges with like moving all the common JS stuff to ES modules. Why it took like a decade is because the way it works, it needs to know up front. I don't know why. I don't know enough about the internals of JavaScript and browsers, but it needs to know up front what module system it's using before it can start parsing the file. Yeah,
you can say type module in your package JSON, and then normal.ts and normal.js will default to ES module, and otherwise it'll default to common JS. So you would really, I mean, you can, but I expect you would only use either MTS or CTS in a single project, differentiated from what your normal files are.
So where I usually use this is when I'm writing like helper scripts in Node or whatever. So obviously my actual code is in just a TS. And then I have like, okay, something just takes a file and minifies it or whatever, like a little Node script that I run. And obviously, I don't want to go through the process of configuring that globally and whatever, and have that clash with my actual package configurations and whatever. So those I usually just do .mjs, just so I get the ES module support and stuff out of the box. So those are the cases where I manually would. But yeah, as Andal said, it's a bit of a pain. Renaming all your stuff to MTS or CTS or MJS or CJS. So you probably set that on a package level. Yeah. All right.
Also,
Go
just
ahead.
one small note: it's not listed in the release notes because it's just a bug fix. But one of the things that is fixed is if you've ever had a type that has a generic with a constraint, and then inside of your type you end up doing a type manipulation that involves a mapping, specifically a mapping of an object type and then intersecting it with another object type. So a common example might be if you want to have an override helper where you take one object and another object, and whatever properties are in the second object are removed from the first object and then intersected with the second object, right?
Yes.
If you did that, it would lose the constraint.
Yes.
And effectively fail, not give you that answer. It would just kind of fail out because it would type it as any internally, but without giving you an error. So that is apparently going to be fixed in 5.6. Tried it out and didn't work for me, but at the same time, Yarn gave me an install error, so that might have been.
So what that would look like is, okay, so let's say you have example T, and okay, let's just do something like I don't know, T and prefix. Okay, so you have this generic.
So that's fine.
Yes.
Because
so
it's not a map type.
Okay.
So if T extended some specific object, right, that had a foo property with a string.
Okay. So it's okay. I get I try and stay away from this because this is always such a big rabbit hole, and I always over engineer things when I start delving into mapping types and stuff. And then I've effectively built my own sub mini domain specific type system on top of TypeScript.
Well, so that's kind of okay, right? If that expresses,
and not if I have to ship features, but yes.
Well, yes and no, right? So I have on a project that I'm working on gone a little bit deeper in the type rabbit hole, and there's so many little niggly bugs that I'm finding as a result of that. Where suddenly, because the types are now better, suddenly it's flagging stuff that wasn't flagged before, and they're real issues. So that keeps the overall quality high. The thing is, it's annoying if the whole time it's not quite working the way you expect, and it's taking you forever to try and get what you want. And that's one of the issues with TypeScript, is there's a lot of stuff that isn't clear in their documentation. For example, the type never is similar to in Haskell, it's the type bottom. Every type system has bottom. By the way, the reason it's called bottom is because types are a hierarchy. Unknown is at the top. It can be anything, right? And then as you get more specific, things go down the hierarchy. And then right at the bottom, there's never, which is so specific that no actual type can ever match it.
Yeah, it's the narrowest. It's the narrowest definition that you can have.
So
you can't go narrower than nothing. Yeah.
Well, yeah. So in TypeScript, if you try to intersect number and string, it would give you never, because something can't actually be both number and string. It's too specific. So never is kind of the absence of a type, and it is therefore implicitly part of every other type, because types have a lot of overlap with set theory. So every type you have is actually part of a union of itself and never. So now, if you want to check whether somewhere in your utility types something is never, you can't just go oh, T extends never.
Oh, I see.
Because it's always gonna be a part of that, right? It's really, really confusing. So because what actually ends up happening, if you did a type like this, if you did I don't know, some helper is never, and it takes a type T, and you go T extends never, true or false. If you ran that, with the input never, it would give you neither true nor false. It would give you never, because T is never, and you can't check whether that extends never. What you actually need to do is, and it won't ever give you like and the reason why that'll be a wrong answer, like if you then tried is never with like string, it would give you Boolean back, because it's implicitly actually string and never. And what TypeScript does when it checks something in a conditional type, it does it distributively. So if you feed in a union, and again, every type is implicitly a union with never, it takes each member of that union separately and checks it in the conditional. So then you end up getting, for the never case, true, and for the other case, false. And then the answer you get is Boolean, which is the union of true and false.
Interesting.
So you're like, what's going on? And it turns out what you need to do is you need to wrap both the T and the never in square brackets, because that avoids the distributivity of that. Anyways, so good luck finding out that this is what you need to do.
Yeah.
I don't know. I think I found it in an issue somewhere. It's actually so that type is technically documented in TypeScript's own conditional type tests. They have like a is never utility type there. That's where some people have found it.
Yeah, and I guess that's a side effect of TypeScript initially being like very class heavy.
This is technically part of any type system. Like in Haskell, bottom is also a part of every single type. So it kind of falls out of TypeScript's implicit distributivity of the conditional check. That's why that happened. Like any type system that automatically distributes the types in some place, like would also, if you try to check if something's bottom, but it's a distributed check, then it would always say yes for the bottom case, because it's inherently a part of every single type. That's like just the way it is. Like that's normal type theory. But the fact, like, this should be documented in TypeScript types, like somewhere in the documentation.
Yeah. All right, let's move on. Material UI 6 is out. I actually haven't looked at it that much. I think you just learned that it's out.
I just learned that it's out, but I am a very heavy user of MUI. I've used it for years. Never actually been my choice. Not that I've been unhappy, but
really?
Never been my choice.
I generally extend it pretty, mind the pun, extensively. So that's what I like about it. It leads itself to like extensibility quite well. So I tend to make a lot of usage of things like the base button and whatever. Instead of just throwing in so I would build my own buttons, but use kind of more of the primitive low level stuff, like the ripple effect and whatever, those type of things. Which I guess, like at some point, like I'm probably better off served by something like React Aria or whatever. But I don't know. It's just I know MUI better than I know React Aria, so it's just like out of habit. But I should probably make an effort to kind of get my React Aria knowledge on the same level.
Really? So for me, the thing with something like that is, what problem is that solving for you, right? Because MUI does have a lot of really good, it's weird to say support for all the accessibility concerns. They care a lot about conformance with the WCAG, and in all of their examples, they use the area props to make it clear that when you copy paste stuff, you'll also keep doing that. They're really good at that. So if you already know Material UI's API and you are getting that accessibility support, and you don't currently have a need to learn Aria, if you already understand, if you already understand like the actual web content accessibility guidelines. So if you're not just like monkey see, monkey do from MUI, if you actually understand like why they're doing that and what goals they're trying to meet, then like going for some other set of components that like also has that, like with React Aria, it's kind of like, well, but just I would do that
Mm,
when I needed to, as in if I inherited a project that already was using that,
mm,
because what am I gaining, right? Like it's just a different API to meet the same goals.
mm. Yeah. I guess it's just a simpler interface.
Yeah, but it's
Because you really only care about the lower level stuff.
yeah, you
You
do.
don't
And
really
if you're
care about like some think like a specific like autocomplete or whatever.
mm,
Yeah. Or date selector or whatever. But yeah, um, I don't know. I guess it's just I just prefer like not working at a higher abstraction than the problem I'm solving. But yeah, like
so if you
because
didn't understand what actual ARIA is, right? Like
mm,
outside of even React, if you
mm,
didn't understand that, and if you didn't know
mm,
what the web content accessibility
yeah.
guidelines are
Let me also
about,
just put a link for anyone
then yeah,
who's hearing
then
this for the first
exploring
time.
React ARIA is like a really good idea, because that means that like you can carry on exploring it in React if that's what you're used to,
Mm,
but kind of get to grips with the underlying concepts. That's
mm,
cool, right? Then it makes
mm,
sense, because I definitely don't recommend that you just use Material UI and never worry or think about that stuff. That's not the idea that I'm coming
mm,
with.
mm, mm. Yeah. So basically, like for anyone who's not familiar with React Aria, is so when you are obviously building interactivity. So you have a search field or you have some popover or a modal or whatever. um, Obviously there are accessibility considerations, and then there's attributes that you need to set on and
Mm,
off on the HTML and so forth, and the way you click and the hover effect and all of that. Like there's specific decisions that need to be made,
mhm,
and obviously Material UI does that as part of like if we, for example, look at um, and this is why a lot of their components seem quite verbose to people who've used stuff like Bootstrap and whatever. Because, for example, if you're like if you are using, for example, the select, in the example, like you would be like, okay, why can't this just be a single component? Why do I need this
mhm,
form control, this input label? Why do I need all this other crap around it? And that is for like accessibility and semantic purposes. So it does a lot of that stuff for you under the hood. But then on top of that, it gives you a lot of other things. For example, um, let's find like the bottom navigation, or the drawer, um, which is like a bit. This is a bit of a higher level abstraction, and so I tend to work mostly because I build design systems. So the design system is the abstraction, and then there's usually a lower level abstraction below that. And I generally use Material UI because you get a lot of the stuff out of the box. But I've
mhm.
been wondering whether it's better to just use something like React Aria, because it's specifically focused on that, and it just tries to solve that problem. But yeah,
It de-
um,
I- it depends
mm,
on what you want, and like whether you like the way Material UI is doing things, what the
mm,
cost is of switching to learning something else. Will you actually be learning anything fundamentally new?
mm,
Do you need that kind of flexibility? Because on the other
mm,
hand, if you needed more flexibility, Material UI itself is kind of implemented as a customization of of what they now call MUI base,
mm,
which shares a lot of the API concepts, but
mm,
doesn't necessarily come with any opinionated styling,
mm.
right?
So
For
this is
example,
yeah.
they have another. I think that's what six was. That's what one of their upcoming releases. I hope it's now in six. Was going to be about, was to, because they started base after the original Material MUI.
Mm, mm,
Was to actually make Material purely an implementation of styling on top of base. Like they have another one called
mm.
Joy that is a
Yes,
different kind of like style that
yes,
is implemented just on top of base. Um,
yeah,
so so that's like an option, right? Like if you
yeah.
needed,
That's true.
if you
Yeah,
needed something that was more flexible from a styling perspective, right, where you don't
yeah.
constantly feel like you're mostly spending your time overriding styling choices the
That's a really
Material
good
one
point.
already made.
I haven't even considered that. Yeah. That's a really good
So
point.
that way you keep a lot of the same familiarity with the API, you keep the great support for
Mm,
the accessibility,
mm,
and you get more flexibility. So
mm,
again, look, if you don't understand ARIA yet, yes, look at React ARIA. It's
mm,
important to understand ARIA. Um, it's responsible UI development. But
mm.
if you already understand the underlying ARIA, then
Yeah.
for me, that wouldn't be a reason to go and learn React ARIA.
That's a really, really good point. And to be honest, like in most projects, I'm not using the base UI. I'm using the material just because of legacy purposes. Because the project started out when there was only one version of material UI, and we've just kind of bumped the version. Um,
So when
so
MUI started, they were using Flow for typing.
yes,
That's
they
when
were
I started using
also
it, way
yeah.
back when.
Yeah, and they also like were using what's it? What was it?
JSS. It
JC.
was one of the very,
JC.
very, very first
Yeah. Oh,
CSS
that
and
thing was
JS
awful.
libraries.
I hated that thing.
It
Oh,
worked fine. It was just a bit of a cumbersome API when you wanted to override and customize some of those styles.
yeah,
Version
yeah.
5 moved to Emotion, and you could switch that out for styled components with the same
Mm,
API. And
yeah.
now they've rolled their own again.
So that's the main thing I was wondering here is let me go to where's the release docs? Because I didn't know the answer to that. How do I get to the
At the top right, there should
Oh,
be
here it
like a
is.
little
Because
notification.
I was quickly scanning this to see. Okay, so they've moved away from emotion. What are they doing now?
So one of the reasons they moved away from Emotion is to kind
Server
of,
side rendering, probably.
yes, server-side rendering
Mm,
and React server components,
yes.
right?
Well, that's
Which,
what I mean by server side
yeah,
rendering.
yeah,
Yeah, yeah,
yeah. And it's also more based on CSS variables. So
yeah. I see that. This is really
it's kind of
cool.
using the platform more. It's still a CSS and JS kind of like approach in
Yeah,
terms of like how you would end up using it,
yeah,
but like in your regular application code.
yeah,
But under the hood, it's closer to the platform, which
yeah. This
I'm a
is
big
really
fan of.
cool. Yeah, I like this change because I never use their theming. I always have my own CSS variables that I just like call in the actual component itself.
Yeah,
Um, so because I don't like
I,
this whole thing about what they previously had, where you had to
yeah,
kind of
yeah.
um,
I
like
actually
use like
wonder if
currying and
this.
whatever.
I actually wonder if this will mean it is going to be a lot easier to get style lint working in a MUI project.
So
So for
I
anyone who's
am
not
using
familiar,
there is a specific style lint extension that I'm using.
really, I'd
Um,
like to know, because does it support all the different ways of doing it? Because you've got the styled API, and then
no,
you've got
no,
the
no, just
SX
the
prop,
no, just the styled.
just the
Yeah,
styled API.
just the
So
styled. Yeah.
because there's the styled API, there's the SX prop, and then there are specific props on specific components. They call it the
Mm,
system properties that not all of
mm,
them have, but some
mm,
of the really kind of basic building block components do, like their box and their stack and their container. They all expose
mm,
these SX props. So you can just go like, like what's an example? You can go color dot something, and you can literally reference the name of a color that you specified in the theme, and that'll work.
mm,
Um, but you can also specify like hex code there. So what I
mm.
would like is stylelint to work with that, so that I can disallow random hex codes in those kinds of
Oh,
properties,
I see.
or the
Yeah.
SX prop, which is a separate way of doing it, or the
Mm,
styled in like API.
mm.
So
Yeah.
that, for example,
Yeah.
when someone decides, oh hey, we want to like do a proper dark mode, um, you don't have all like 1,000 edge cases. And
Yes.
your whole design ends up being more consistent because you're using constraint-based design. You're kind of
Yes.
disallowing developers from special casing a ton of like
Mm.
tiny little tweaks. I don't know if anybody's read Refactoring UI. Your design
The bug.
overall will benefit from a small set
Mm.
of well-considered choices, even if in certain specific situations it's not the optimal option.
Yes.
The
Yeah.
design as a whole will be a lot
Consistency.
better.
Yes. Yeah.
And cognitively, actually, in terms of building and designing UIs, it's also
Mm.
less effort.
Yeah, but that's a general rule of thumb that I follow is I'd rather consistently make use stuff that's not ideal than actually like in some cases use a better solution. I'd rather stick with, so if a code base, despite how I feel about classes, if a code base is heavily class based, then yeah, I guess I'm using classes now. But yeah. So,
Yeah,
but it's
like
interesting. I
the
like,
same way
yeah.
that tabs are better than spaces. But like,
Mm.
if
See,
a
that's I
project's
just
already using spaces, I'll be okay. I'll be
yeah,
okay.
see. Here's the thing. Zano. You can configure the prettier however you want, and I'm just going to use what I want anyway. And let prettier sort it out. Yeah.
Well, I mean, yeah. So that's the whole idea. Is that so? That's the big reason I like tabs is you and your editor can decide how long things are supposed to be to suit you,
Yeah.
and it's actually an accessibility feature, in my opinion, that tabs have and spaces don't.
Yeah. Yeah. I get that. Sure, but like then you open up GitHub and yeah.
And
Anyway.
oh, you can now set that. You
Oh,
can now go
really?
into your GitHub settings and set how wide you want a space to display. They defaulted to a tab to display. Sorry, a tab character. I think they
Yeah.
defaulted to 4, and you can
Sure.
change it. But that means you have to be logged in.
Oh, that's cool. So actually, honestly, this release seems a bit underwhelming. I guess it needs to be a point
Yeah,
major release because they're changing out the
the
underlying way of
CSS library.
styling.
Yeah.
But
And
it
then
seems
they're moving towards
that's
supporting Material U, Material Design version 3 in their next
mm,
release. That's
uh,
the
yeah, I don't like it. But that's sad. Um,
support for container queries though. That's
Yeah,
nice.
that's nice. But yeah, I don't know. Like I just I don't like Material You. But anyway, that's a completely different discussion.
Mm.
I don't like designing with it. I don't like using it as a user. Yeah, I don't know. Okay, so I quickly. So what is the implication? So emotion swapped out. Yeah, forced us. Yeah. Uh, Oh, so Pigment CSS is what they are using now.
Well,
Is it that?
they
Is it their own
made
thing?
it. It's their own thing, but
Yes.
it is standalone. Like it's not
Okay.
something that
Yes.
is only intended to be used
Yes.
ever with Material
Oh, okay.
UI
Cool. Yeah.
or any
And
UI.
yeah, because it functions, I guess, at a build process level, so it is a bit
Mm.
different. Like,
And they
so
took some
it's
inspiration from things like Linaria CSS, and
yeah. Okay. What's the API like? Is it similar to Emotion?
I actually don't know. I've read it
Is it
about it at a high level,
okay?
but I'm sure I'll find out soon
Yeah,
because
it
I'm using
looks
MUI on a project and we'll update it at
yeah.
some point.
Yeah, it looks similar. I guess they just took the emotion interface and actually wired the underlying stuff up to actually work with. Although no, not really, because this one looks a bit different, styled.
So yeah,
Um,
that's the styled components. So that's the styled components kind of
yes, but
way of
see,
doing
they
things.
have the actual properties in quotes. Um, and they're calling it as an object. They're not doing the template literal thing.
Oh,
Um,
right. You can actually do that as well.
that's
Uh,
what I'm doing.
yeah, that's
So
you can actually do that as well. That is possible.
so,
Um,
but yeah. Oh, in the new stuff.
that I don't know.
Yeah. See, if
Don't know
I'm
if that's
doing
possible to do in the new stuff.
yeah, if I'm looking for a backtick styled, it doesn't seem that way. Oh, that's a pity. Uh, because I do like the fact that you can literally just take that CSS and put it in a CSS file and it's going to work.
Mm,
um,
yeah.
which is nice, like especially when you're refactoring, like you have something that's not in React, and you can just literally copy and paste those class properties. But yeah, oh well. Okay, we'll see how this pans out. I'm probably not gonna probably gonna be a good year or whatever since I even consider 6. I'll let them find
Talking
out.
about
Yeah.
big changes. So the
Mm.
year of Angular.
Oh, cool. Yeah, let's quickly talk about that before we can quickly mention the other things super quickly. Okay, so I'll summarize it as follows. Um, I I think I have an appreciation. I like so okay. So effectively, so what happened? So um I actively seeked out clients. So I think I started this year with a New Year's resolution that so I've used Angular, I've taught Angular, but basically just Hello World examples. I'm not at scale, and so I actively sought out client work that they were using Angular, and um, then so I found one, and well, it's not like obviously it's someone who I've done work for before, so it's not just some random hey who's using Angular. But then I said like, okay, cool. Like I really want to dig into this as a consultant, and they were also looking for someone to help out. So it kind of worked out nicely. But so basically, I've been doing for the last 6 months, like basically just full time Angular, and so yeah, and I'm glad I did it because I wouldn't have ever if unless I deliberately decided to try out Angular to actually work at it at scale. So there's a couple of things that I think really so okay and sorry, just let me get back to it. So the reason why I'm no longer now going to do Angular is because they have a massive legacy code base, and like we were looking at actually upgrading it, and what we realized is that there's so much legacy stuff in there that it's not as simple as upgrading, and we're going to have to do the classic thing where you build a part of your product like in like on like a subdomain or whatever, and you gradually move stuff over there. Yeah, it's painful, but like it's less painful than just like bumping a major version and everything exploding. um and so and I think because of that, like now I have free reign to like have the team use whatever I want them to use. And so obviously I'm going to go with my preference, because I think this is one thing I realized as well. um like I appreciate Angular, and I think I have a lot of respect now for the Angular team and a lot of the stuff they do, but my personal preference is React. And I can now articulate like really well why. And it basically comes down to one thing, and that is like how I feel about the DOM. Um, and React is effectively like you know the DOM sucks. Get it like the DOM is the problem. Let's get rid of the DOM and do a virtualized version of the DOM. And I'm 100% on board with that. Whereas Angular tries to adhere to the DOM as far as possible, tries to um, like in terms of the way you use attributes, um and like even like it try like a it tries to adhere closely to web components and stuff as well. And so for example, like a good example is events. Okay,
Mhm.
so like Angular models the way you do callbacks and stuff in Angular. You use kind of like the DOM's event system.
Mhm.
So it probably does some magic under the hood, but at the end of the day, you dispatch events in the
Mhm.
same way you would dispatch an event from. And also another thing is your actual Angular components themselves are DOM elements,
Mhm.
whereas in React, the component itself is just like a function. Like you can't like, and that's why you have to forward refs and stuff like that, because it's
Not
not
in React 19. The ref is
okay.
just going to be a prop.
Sure, but like that's a developer experience thing. The
Mhm.
the actual component itself isn't a DOM node.
Yeah. Yeah.
So you
It's not
can't
like
set
if you
you can't
declare the.
set yes.
Yeah.
Whereas like in Angular, you can actually like it's an actual DOM node, and you can directly set the styles and stuff on it. So
Mhm.
that's effectively what it comes down to. I like the
So
Like
how would you
yeah.
want to compose or encapsulate some behavior in a component without creating an extra DOM node? Is that a thing you can do using Angular's component model?
So sorry, repeat that. So how would
So it,
you?
so
Oh,
in
you
yeah,
I'm probably gonna get corrected, but because I don't know that much about the internals, but from my experience, like that's not something that you do. Like your components are kind of some weird like custom element thing that's happening. Um, so you always have a you can always do the colon host thing in your CSS
mm,
where
mm,
you can actually style the component itself, so the
mhm,
node that is the component itself.
yeah.
Um, yeah, so I don't think you can do that, and I don't think it's actually even encouraged. Um, but yeah, I think the events is a good example for me because I don't like I don't like event bubbling. I don't like the way the DOM does it. Like I like this idea of passing callbacks around as actual functions. I
Hmm.
don't like the fact that, but I don't like the fact in Angular that you treat your basically your props and your events as two different ontologically two different things. Whereas I like the fact that in React, you know, like it's just values. It's just a value. Whether you're passing a callback or whether you're passing an actual like primitive or a reference or whatever. Um, yeah. So, but I understand, you know, from the Angular, like from the side of the Angular team, like they try and adhere to the DOM as far as possible, and I think they try and extend the DOM instead of reinvent the DOM. So, and I'm very much in the camp of the DOM is the problem. So I prefer React just throwing out the DOM completely and
It's
saying like,
interesting that you have that perspective because I think React sticks quite closely to certain parts of the DOM, right? So
yeah, it's a yeah,
they they
sure,
definitely don't like the use it imperatively, right? The
yes,
whole idea, the React's whole problem, the React's not whole problem, React's whole thing is
yes,
to solve the issue of synchronizing changes to state.
yes,
They started with DOM state.
yes,
And now they're moving to like client server state as well. But that's
yes,
basically what it does. It's like having a declarative way to solve like changes, asynchronous changes to state in a way that is deterministic. That's what
yeah,
they do, right? That's
yeah, so,
that's that's
yeah.
that's what I like about it. That's what they do. So
But yeah, the
they do that with the
interface,
DOM as well. But the actual
yeah,
API they expose is almost exactly the DOM API, not necessarily the HTML API. So think of
yes,
it as just the properties of an HTML
yes,
element, not its attributes, right?
yes,
So that's why you can't use class. You have to use class
yes,
name
class
because the
name,
DOM has
yes,
class name. That's why
yeah.
on
So
a label you
it
can't use
maps
for. You have
directly
to use
to,
HTML for
yeah,
because those are reserved words in JavaScript, and that's why the DOM doesn't
yes,
have them, and that's why React doesn't have them. I know with
yes,
Preact you can decide to ignore that. There are a few
yes.
changes, like React uses on change instead of on input. That was because when they were released, there were still some browser inconsistencies that they wanted to paper over. They also
Mm,
used a synthetic event system for performance reasons, and again to normalize a few browser inconsistencies. But those are things that they actually say
mm,
that if they were starting React now, they wouldn't do that. They
mm.
would stick even closer to the DOM. Problem is the migration for that would just be too ugly,
Yeah,
and you don't do it. Like that's
yeah,
one of the reasons why they don't expose a synthetic event factory function that you can use for your own custom events.
yes,
Can't.
yeah,
You instead must do it differently. Like, and they now
yes,
have support for the web components, so you can go on foo
mm,
and it will listen for foo events bubbling
yes,
through that component. Like where
yes,
that function eventually gets
yes,
given to a host component, and
yes,
then they will bind an event listener for. There's a bit of a convention around the naming, so they bind 4 event listeners actually because it
mm,
could be any of them. Um, but like when you dispatch a foo event, then that'll happen.
mm,
So they actually
mm,
stick quite closely to DOM, in
yes,
my opinion. The only
yes,
other thing they
complete,
do is they
yeah,
refire events if something goes through a portal. So the DOM normally wouldn't do that. So they do take care of that. Like if an event would bubble through a portal, like they refire it so that it bubbles through the React component tree also, and not just the DOM.
Yeah. So sure, yes. I think compared to something like Svelte, like it's Svelte completely abstracts the DOM away. Like you don't even you can which is why I think like a lot of people perceive Svelte to be much easier to use, to have a better developer experience, or simpler. I actually don't find it that much simpler, but it's because I'm already quite familiar with the internals of the browser. And as you said, React kind of maps one-to-one to the actual like DOM itself, the JavaScript part of the DOM. And not necessarily but I think Angular goes even further, and I think Angular their interfaces and their decisions are driven from my understanding. My understanding is that it's driven by, or what the feeling that I got is it's very much driven by trying to extend the DOM. So so React doesn't throw the entire DOM out, but well, I mean, it does, but not in terms of like the way you interface with it. And to me, Angular tries to extend what is already there. I think Angular doesn't. I think this is the difference. To me, React removes stuff, whereas Angular exclusively only extends stuff. So here's a good example. So, I actually ended up using a ton of web components in the in the code base, just because it's so effortless. Because so you can do it. You have interop now with React and web components, but it's not. It took a while. Sorry, just give me a second. I'm back in a. Sorry, there's a mouse in the house, and my wife.
It's okay. Look, we have 2 minutes left anyway.
Yeah, yeah.
The mouse was only slightly early. We could cut it short. It's all right.
But I have to go deal with a mouse that's gone wild. And yeah, my wife's very scared. But yeah, so my main takeaway is that, and I do admire that, in terms of the whole concept of the extensible web and all of that. But for me personally, I prefer, I kind of prefer the Douglas Crockford kind of approach, where you should actually figure out your own subset of things that you want to use. You shouldn't try and use everything. So that was his approach of JavaScript. In JavaScript, the good parts is that you should actually, rather than just using everything there is, figure out what are the good parts and build your own subset of tools. And so I subscribe to that, which probably means that I kind of tend to prefer something like React or so forth. But I for someone who's I want the framework to just extend the platform and not remove things from the platform, whereas React removes stuff. I get that, and I get the appeal of that. But for me, it's a personal thing. Yeah. So
I can only comment on Angular 1 and AngularJS and Angular really early on, version 2 and back then. That was my experience with it. And whilst I see, one of the reasons I chose React is because, at least based on my experience with those frameworks at the time, React was much closer to the platform than Angular was. In the sense that Angular kind of abstracts over things and extends it in a way that isn't using the platform's native extension. I don't know if that's still the case, but certainly back then it was and in effect, it's kind of inspired. It felt like it was inspired by the DOM. And if you know the DOM, you've got a good jumping off point into Angular. But as you get more into it, you'll end up learning Angular. Whereas with React, sure, you end up learning a lot of React, but there's still under the hood, you're not so completely isolated from what's actually happening with the DOM.
Mm,
So and as a result, throughout my usage of React, I ended up learning a lot more stuff. Not that I didn't know anything to begin with, but a lot more stuff about JavaScript and browser engines and the DOM as well, because it was like orthogonal in a way to it.
Yeah.
Anyway.
I won't say that's the case anymore. I would say that with React, you're going to learn much more about JavaScript. But I do think with Angular, you're going to learn more about the DOM and the way, because, you know, like, you're going to have a hard time if you don't understand how event bubbling works, and how events work, you know, and captured events and all that stuff. Whereas in React, like, there's probably a crap ton of React developers that have a very cursory understanding of how events actually, and the events API in the browser actually even works, because they don't need to. They can just pass callbacks, which to me is a good thing. But I understand if you want to see your framework as an extension of the underlying platform, that you might be like, I like the fact that it takes what and and you just create your own custom events that get bubbled up and so forth. But yeah, okay.
You got a mouse to take care of.
Jeez, yeah. Okay, my family is going apeshit.
I can hear the screaming. Bye-bye.
Yeah, it's my daughter. All right. Thanks so much, Sandor. This is really great. Cool. Cheers,
Bye.
mate.